Hello, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. We're delighted that everyone could join us this morning for our webinar, We're All Influencers Now. We have some fantastic guests joining us and of course we are basing this on the latest FuturePRoof guide of the same title, We're All Influencers Now. We have Sarah Waddington, Stephen Waddington and Andrew Terry. Good morning all.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
We will be going one person at a time to present different sections and as we go through, you can all join the conversation in the chat box on your window at the moment, or you can also tweet us. You can at Vuelio use the hashtags, find us on LinkedIn or of course email. If you have any questions, there will be time for a Q&A at the end and we're expecting a lively discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you very much. And firstly, big thanks to you and Vuelio for inviting us on. Great to be able to chat to everybody about this latest influencer guidance that we've produced. Just to give a little brief intro to me, I'm Sarah Waddington. I have my own business, PR marketing management consultancy business in the Northeast called Astute.Work, and that helps me basically pay for FuturePRoof, which is a community I've built since 2015 to help social mobility within the PR community. And just to share best practice, for those who don't know it, please do look it out. We have a website, futureproofingcomms.co.uk, and on there you'll see that we have produced 4 books. It's a big community project. 3 of those are crowdsourced books. There's a 4th one which is actually based on influencers within PR. And we also have produced a number of different papers on different topics which may interest. So there's one on PR business models, there's one on mental health, which continues to be a big topic within our sector. This summer we produced a really good guide to disinformation, which curated lots and lots of best practice and bits of information on that, so that we don't ourselves spread mis or disinformation. And now, thanks to Stephen, Andrew, and the team at Vuelio, we have this fantastic influencer governance paper that we're going to talk through. But hopefully you'll find it incredibly useful. FuturePRoof there is a resource for everybody, so please do have a look, get involved. There's the We Are Proof handle on Twitter, and there's a private Facebook group as well if you'd like to get involved and pitch ideas. And don't forget the podcast too, so I have to give a plug for that. But that's all from me. I'm going to obviously be involved throughout Stephen and Andrew's bit, and there'll be plenty of time for questions, so feel free to pitch questions both about the influencer part, but also FuturePRoof more widely if you'd like at the end. So fingers crossed you find this of great use. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Sarah. So my name's Stephen Waddington. I'm the managing director of a digital agency called Metia. I'm also a professor at Newcastle University, where I teach on the MA course. We're here, though, to talk today about this piece of work that FuturePRoof has just published. And its ambition really was to address the fact that public relations has been slow to have a voice around the governance related to influencer marketing. And I'll talk through some of the issues that's already created. What we wanted to do was explore best practice and look at the guidance that already exists within the market. Now, there's a misconception that because influencer marketing is a nascent area, it isn't covered by law or regulation. It's absolutely not the case, and I'm delighted we were able to bring together a group of experts, including Scott Guthrie, Andrew Terry, who you'll hear from, and the team of Vuelio. So if we kick off and just talk about what's happened in the last 10 years. Influencers are a product of the fragmentation of media that's happened in the last 10 years. So as print has shifted to the internet and new forms of social media have arisen on every single form of social media, individuals have created their own communities, their own audiences, and so we've got this situation now where literally everybody can be an influencer. If you create interesting content, engaging conversation via a social media platform, you are said to have influence. Now, because it's so nascent, it's an area that's fraught with confusion, and there's been a bit of a land grab between media marketing and public relations to operate in this area. Some stats, we were quite surprised when we dug out this analyst data from the US relating to the size of the influencer market that already exists. I mean, it's valued at the moment at £4.5 billion worldwide, and set to grow to $18.5 billion by 2024. Now, that's being fueled by brands and organizations seeking to engage influencers as part of their marketing activity. But at the same time, governance is a work in progress, because this data here from the ASA relates not just to influencers, but also to any form of paid social and digital advertising. Found that there were 16,000 complaints last year, around 14,000 online ads. Now, it's interesting to see that the ASA is starting to break out specifically issues related to influencer marketing, and you can go and find those on the website. Now, our concern was public relations didn't have a voice in this area, and there was limited governance coming out of any of our from the associations, professional associations, and so that's what we sought to address. And Scott Guthrie, who works in this market, Scott's a management consultant. He's actually speaking at a conference in Cairo at the moment exactly on this topic, so wasn't able to join us. But we caught up during the summer at a venue in London. I want to tell you this quick story because it's the genesis of the project. A venue in London called Frank's Cafe in Peckham. Now, Frank's Cafe is one of those achingly hip locations that has been generated out of the modernisation of an old industrial space. In fact, it's an old car park in Peckham. A designer called Paloma Gormley and Lettice Jake have created this space on the top of this former car park, which has become a social environment. It's become a bar. It has installations on it, and it's got incredible views all over London. Now, the profile of this place and its success relies in part because it's a beautiful space, but they've engaged the community around it purely by creating environments where people can share content. And there's some examples here. In fact, if you go and look at Frank's Cafe Peckham, the hashtag on either Instagram or Twitter, you'll see lots and lots of beautiful images of either the installations in this space or the incredible views as the sun goes down over the West End of London. And it's a fantastic example of an organisation, Frank's Cafe, using earned relationships with people who have influence to create a profile. At the same time as Scott and I met, there was this case. The ASA had just ruled on this case, not an earned case, but a paid case in this case, with former Love Island contestant Olivia Buckland and Coco Brown, which is an instant tanning brand, over this particular piece of content. Now, Olivia Buckland, unlike many celebrities, has endorses a variety of products. One of those products is the tanning brand, and she posted this piece of content. And if you go and look at her Instagram feed, you can see lots of posts like this. But she posted this piece of content based on a paid relationship that she failed to add clear disclosure to. At the time this was originally posted, she'd used the hashtag brand ambassador, which the ASA deemed wasn't sufficient to recognise the disclosure of a paid relationship, and it said she should use the hashtag ad or advertising. And that really shows the challenge that public relations has. We fall into this area where we have this potential, as in the case of Frank's Cafe, to earn relationships and create spaces and environments and earn influence by engaging with people on a purely relationship basis. But we also have the opportunity to work on a paid basis with influencers such as Olivia Bookman, who will publish or co-create content and charge for it via their platforms. And where in that area creates an area of greyness. Now, this is a diagram that's created by Scott that shines a spotlight very neatly on the issue. It shows the tension between this earned and paid relationship. Now, there's absolutely no reason that public relations or marketing shouldn't work in either space. But the issue is, if you're working on a paid basis, you must always disclose. One final point here is to recognize the fact that influencers aren't media, they are human beings, they are individuals, they are people. And that's why I'd always say that public relations should be involved in any discussion around influencer engagement or have the right to work in this area, because we're focused on long-term relationships, we're focused on building influence, and that means whether it's paid or earned. One final thing I want to show you that really speaks to how this market is getting really hot, especially around governance issues, and that's this two insurance policies we uncovered while we were working on this paper. Now, insurers have previously always underwritten celebrities, high-profile individuals, and sports personalities around issues of reputation, influence, and intellectual property and such like. And it's just really interesting to see that both these insurance Beasley and Hiscock have moved into the influencer space and extended their offer to provide protection for exactly some of the issues that we're talking about here today. I want to move on now and hand over to Andrew Terry. Now, Andrew's a media lawyer who's going to talk more about this relationship and the issues that we need to watch out for as we're working with influencers. Andrew, thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Andrew Terry. I'm the head of intellectual property and media at Evershed Sutherland, a law firm, and I do a lot of work with clients across many sectors, particularly in advertising, social media, and brand protection. And so I'll talk in the next section about marketing and influencer law, and in particular how the ASA looks at this space. And I think there has been a perception, or there is still a perception on the part of lots of people, that it is something like the Wild West out there, that there isn't much law and not many rules or regulations. But as Stephen rightly pointed out, that isn't the case. And it's very important that influencers as individuals and brand owners and those in PR and marketing need to be aware of those restrictions, because if you're not, then you run the risk of effectively undermining the very purpose of using an influencer. Now, the main body you need to look out for is the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, and that is essentially the regulator for all advertising in all space in the UK. So whether it's TV, radio, social media, or on the business, the websites of a business or a brand. They produce rulings every week. So if there are any concerns from a competitor or people on the high street about promotions or advertising or marketing, they can make a complaint to the ASA. They rule on them every week. So if you look on the ASA website every Wednesday, you'll see a list of decisions. That could just be one or two, or it could be half a dozen. You only need one or two adverse decisions from the ASA. So decisions from the ASA saying that the influencer hasn't complied with the rules, or that the brand owner hasn't done what it should have done with its advertising, before you get some really bad momentum. the press is now, and I've seen a real change in this over the last 2 or 3 years, is really in the habit of picking up on those decisions every week, because it's free content, effectively, so they can talk about this ad was banned and this influencer did this, isn't it terrible? And so you can undo some very good work very quickly if you're not complying with what the ASA thinks you should do. The ASA has produced a number of guidelines which it's worth looking at. They're very accessible. They're listed on the slide. The September 2018 influencer guide is particularly useful. And what that draws out is what really is at the heart of everything the ASA does, which is this concept that nothing you should do as an influencer or a brand owner should be misleading. And so that's a very broad definition. And when it comes to influencers, what they're looking at primarily is making sure that all content that they deem to be advertising is obviously identifiable as such. So the question then becomes, what is it that influencers are doing that might be deemed to be an advert? Because clearly not everything they're doing is advertising, and that's the whole, to some extent, the very purpose of using influencers is to move away from traditional advertising and traditional promotion. But what the ASA says, if there is any payment being made, and that could be money, obviously, but it could be gifts or freebies or other inducements. So if there's any payment and then there's some control between the brand owner and the influencer, then that's deemed to be advertising. And control is a very broad definition. So control, it does not have to be the brand owner dictating what the influencer is putting on Instagram or putting on their Twitter feed. It can be as subtle as the brand owner having an expectation that the influencer is going to be promoting the brand in some way. So when you look at the definitions in that way, you will quickly see that a lot of content that comes from influencers will be seen by the ASA as advertising. If it's seen by the ASA as advertising, then it needs to be made clear on the promotion or on the social media feed that it is advertising. The ASA recommends using hashtag ad or hashtag advert to highlight that relationship. There has been a understandable reluctance, I think, on the part of brand owners and influencers to be highlighting that relationship, but that's the view the ASA takes, and they don't have much truck with people who try and go round those sort of descriptions by saying things like, thanks to X brand or sponsored or at name of brand. Those kind of workarounds won't cut it with the ASA, so they are very prescriptive about how you should describe the content. Quickly, it's worth mentioning that the CMA, which is the Competition and Markets Authority, also has a view on these things. They talk about using references such as advertisement feature or advertisement promotion. So it can be a confusing space, but my recommendation would be, in short, would be to listen to what the ASA says about this. So have an eye on what they're doing. Look regularly at the decisions. You get a lot of decisions now about influencers, and it's interesting just to watch those. But I would say 70% of those deal with the issue of whether the content was correctly identified as advertising. The other things you need to think about when you're looking at how influencers and brand owners engage are set out on this last slide with the seven circles on. And this again comes back to the fact that the way influencers have developed and evolved is inherently casual, and to some extent that people want to keep it that way, but it's important to have some clarity over the relationship between brand owners and influencers, and also PR and marketing that may be sitting between them or working with both elements. And so the things you might want to think about papering, and by papering, if you have a very long-term relationship with an influencer and it's very high value, and there are certainly those relationships around, then clearly you need a pretty robust and lengthy agreement in place. But even if it's relatively short-term and the value is relatively modest, I would still be recommending that you paper it in some form. So it could be just a very short side letter or a very short contract. It's very easily done, but it just avoids disputes happening, and it is the best protection that both the influencer and the brand owner have, that they're going to stay on track, and the reputation of either of them is not going to be impacted by the relationship as it goes forward. So quickly moving through those circles on approvals, the issue really there is that some brands will be looking for some kind of pre-approval rights on content because they might be very conservative or very cautious. Often that's not very realistic. The whole point about influencers is creating live content and being reactive and spontaneous. So that may be insisted upon, but as I say, isn't always realistic. So it's often the case that you might look to have quite strict guidelines in place about the type of content that can be used or that can mention the brand in question. On deliverables, some of this is obvious, and I think most you would have this front of mind. What's going to be posted, how often, when, what platforms. But there are other issues around, are there going to be other services provided by the influencer, for example? Might they attend events? That kind of thing. IP rights, beloved of lawyers, that really is about when an influencer is producing content, who's going to own that? Now, typically that will be the influencer. They're doing the creating, it's their stuff. But as a brand owner who is engaging with the influencer, they may well want some kind of license or some kind of right to use that content in the future. Exclusivity is something that I think is often not addressed but is really important, because as a brand owner you want to know that you effectively have sole use of that influencer over a certain period of time. Now that exclusivity might be across the board, or it might just be in relation to that particular sector, but certainly a brand owner is not going to want an influencer working with competitors or entities seen as competitors to that brand owner. Payment obviously is always going to be relevant. We all work in a space, in an area which I think we feel very privileged to work in, but certainly being paid is still useful and pleasant. I think having staged payments or target-based payment or bonus systems can work very well. It reassures the brand owner that they are getting the content delivery that they expect. So that is worth thinking about. Legal compliance really is the bit I was talking about with the ASA. That is very important. The brand owner will expect the influencer to be complying with ASA rules. If you're working in a regulated sector, so for example financial services, now that's an area with very limited penetration from influencers, but there are other regulated sectors food and drink is regulated. So there are other sectors where there is regulation, then the influencer needs to be on top of what they can and can't say. So there have been some adverse decisions around promotion of slimming products and quasi-medicinal products, that kind of thing. So if you're in that space, take care. And then finally, reputation, which is what this is all about, really. I think having robust takedown processes so that if things do go wrong or if an influencer goes off message, then there is a way of kind of correcting the ship, as it were. Okay, thank you. That was all from me, but I'm very happy to take questions at the end.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Stephen, I think you were just going to wrap up on... Sarah, sorry, wrap up on this final slide.
One of the two of us. Either one, if you put into that, there's no problem. Yeah, so I think hopefully everybody has found that useful today. And just before I do wrap up, again, big thank you to the people behind that. So you've heard from Stephen, you've heard from Andrew, but obviously Scott Guthrie was absolutely key to the production of this. And we also had a really useful contribution from Rupa Shah, who's the founder and director of #Ad Consulting. So if you do want to see the full report, just a quick note again that you can find that on the blog at futureproofandcomms.co.uk. And obviously we've been sharing through the Twitter handle on our FutureProof community. But yeah, really, really valuable stuff, and hopefully people will be able to put it to practical use day to day. And it's just to reiterate that there is that collective responsibility there. So I think there's something for us all to learn here. So when I read this report, there's lots of ways which I think, okay, that we need to amend how we practice. And actually there were some things that we just weren't aware of, and certainly Andrew's contribution there, hopefully other people felt the same, and we'll go back and look at exactly what they're doing, what their processes are. You know, we all know how quickly reputations can be impacted with one wrong move. So it's down to all of us. And I think what the report has highlighted, and thanks to Stephen and to Scott again for recognising the gap in the market, that there is a big need for education in this area. And as Andrew said, this is evolving all the time, and keeping an eye on the ASA site will be really important to see how they continue to look at cases and respond accordingly. Thank you very much again to Vuelio. They've put a link to the report there, so you can actually get a download very quickly. And please do fire any questions across, because all three of us are here to do that. I know that Scott is very available on Twitter as well, so if you've got anything and you wanted to ask him particularly, I know fine well that he would jump in and is very, very generous with his time. I'm just very quickly checking his Twitter handle there. Yes, it's at SAB Guthrie, Sab Guthrie, and like I say, it's always up for answering questions, and is absolutely on point in this area.
Brilliant. Sarah, thank you so much. We will move to a Q&A. We have a little bit of time for a Q&A. Any questions that we can't answer live, we'll definitely follow up, and there'll be blog posts that we'll send out to everyone with the recording. We've tweeted out the FuturePRoof guide. It's all over Twitter, so please do check it out. Sarah, if I could start with you, this guide's been out, it's been out for a few weeks now. I'm just wondering what the feedback has been from the industry, people you've spoken to about this. Is there an acknowledgement that there is lots of work to be done? Is the industry on board?
Yes, to all of that. I mean, we've had a great response, over 1,000 downloads of the guide. So I think that just shows you immediately there is a massive appetite for this kind of information. I think people, practitioners, are feeling a little bit vulnerable in this area because they want to get it right. We're all professionals. Many of us will be members of either the CIPR or the PRCA and are very aware that, of best practice. But because it's emerging, I'm still not quite sure what looks right and, that we're actually covered. So that's what really has been the feedback in terms of thank you very much for doing this. And like I said, I can't take the credit. Stephen, Scott, and Andrew have to have that, but incredibly useful. And it'll be interesting to see how practice starts to change because of this. I know the CIPR are going to be convening an influencer relations panel. It'll be interesting to see the work they do. And I think that's very much needed.
Excellent. Thank you. Stephen, we do have quite a few questions coming in. But I did have one for you, particularly around the marketing and PR split in influencer marketing. I'm just wondering if what your view is, if marketing has been using influencers in paid-for campaigns, and then obviously the PR department wants to, the PR team wants to have an earned campaign. They want to get these people along for free. Is that relationship already a commercial relationship, and so it's impossible to use those same people, or should they still be working with the marketing department and getting those people there to earned events and free situations rather than just paying for their time?
So there's no general rule, to be frank, because of the ongoing blurring of disciplines. That's been a drumbeat of the last 20 years. Public relations is working in earned and paid. Marketing is working also in paid and earned. But you tend to find that the entry point, though, from a public relations point of view, will be an extension to an existing piece of media relations work. So if there's a campaign or an announcement that's going to go out and hit journalists in a particular sector, then influencers will be considered that. And the entry point typically is an earned relationship. So we're launching a new product, come and have a look at it. From a marketing point of view, typically influencers are treated as a form of media. So we need to, marketing will have a target around a certain amount of reach, and influencers are mapped on that basis and typically treated as a paid for. It's really hard to generalise because speaking to the general PR comes from an earned point of view, marketing from a paid point of view, but there's so much blurring between the two disciplines. Is why this is such a hot area.
I think you say with traditional PR and the fact that influence media, we had a question come in. Andrew, I think maybe you'd be best to take a view on this, and this comes up quite a lot when we're speaking to our influencer community. It's what is the tipping point between influencer and journalist? If we offer a press script to a journalist, then they'll publish what they publish. But if we offer the same opportunity to an influencer, they need to be using hashtag ad or hashtag advert and be very clear about the relationship there. Is there a line that's blurred? Do these rules need to apply to journalists as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think almost the lack of clarity reflects how much this is moving. I mean, there has certainly been quite a lot of criticisms of newspapers and others for having effectively advertorials or advertising content. So you do get decisions or complaints against newspapers for not being clear about that. So there is an obligation on journalists if they're producing content of that nature. But I think that usually only bites where you do have, frankly, kind of cash passing from hand to hand. So if it's a bit more subtle, or you're just giving content to a journalist and they publish it, then there wouldn't be an expectation that would be identified in some way as advertising. So I think at the moment there is probably a greater burden on influencers, I would say, and I think it is a bit murky. But I think the danger for influencers is if you don't do it, and you have adverse decisions against you, then that can impact on your reputation very quickly, and particularly if you're an individual, then that's going to go south quickly. Whereas with a journalist or a newspaper, it will have less of an impact. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying possibly journalists and other aspects of traditional media are happier to take a bit of a punt on it because they see it as lower risk for them because effectively they're bigger. So it's perhaps an unfair picture at the moment, but I would say it's incumbent upon influencers and their advisors to try and do the right thing by the ASA for their own benefit and their own reputation.
Okay, excellent. And do you see, is there any idea or concept that's going to change? It's going to start pushing back onto traditional journalism?
Well, I think, as I say, where there is a very clear commercial relationship between the journalist and the brand, then that should be made clear already. So I think some of it is about perhaps a lack of awareness that that's happening. There certainly has been also a lack of clarity from newspapers, journalists. They might use the description of advertorial or advertising content, but often it's not clear. So I think there will be increasing, i.e. they're using the words, but they just frankly hide them, or it's very small font, or it's on the back of the insert, that kind of thing. So I think there is pressure coming on journalists to be clearer about it, but I think more pressure needs to be applied, frankly.
Okay, excellent. And Steve, I'm going to put this one to you. When you're working with influencers for campaigns, what happens if down the road after you've decided to work with them, it turns out a number or a large proportion of their followers are fake as you've been working with them?
Good question.
Yeah, good question. I'd suggest that modern tools would mean that you'd be able to spot that earlier than you maybe would. I mean, part of the planning and due diligence around working out who are the most appropriate people to engage with is using tools and software such as your own to spot things like fake followers. I mean, I did a piece of work actually at the start of the year where I showed how easy it is to drive up number of likes or followers on a Twitter account by promoting and paying for it and not disclosing it. And wrote about that. You can go and find that on my blog. But anyone with a basic tools that was to go and investigate the networks of the accounts I created would spot instantly that it wasn't organic and it was fake. So I'd say use the tools, and that's an important point actually. As this market matures, the amount of tools and technology coming into the market to help you plan and understand it and make sense of it is just just getting better and better. And fair play to Vuelio as well, because I'd certainly include your work and the databases and analysis you do in that for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the unrequested endorsement. We appreciate that a lot. I'm just going to.
I'm not.
Yeah. hashtag not an ad. Just last question, Sarah. I'm going to come to you as someone who has planned campaigns with influencers. When you're looking at people to work with, is it best to? The question is, should we be looking at one channel or lots of channels? I'm going to tie it up with another question, which is about if you're only focusing on people that are on Instagram, and Instagram changes its algorithm, they lose their influence, or they're following their audience, and that's obviously a risk to you. Should you be using people that are blogging, podcasting, blogging, everything else as well in one campaign?
I think, let's start with the second part of the question. There's always a risk there in terms of, we've always said at FuturePRoof that, you should always, ideally you want to have your own content on your own sites because obviously you've got control over those. You don't have on any other sites. So I would start with that, but clearly that's very difficult when it comes to influencers and if you want to use their platforms to promote a service or product. When it comes to different influencers and different channels, I guess that goes back to what your campaign objectives are. I mean, at the moment we're talking around all the sexy bits, which are the Geordie Shore people who perhaps they kind of have built their whole stall around Insta, but that's not always the case for everyone. If you're doing something that's to do with the countryside, you might want Chris Peckham, and that would not necessarily be the place to find him. So it's just horses for courses. There isn't really one set answer to that. It's about what are your campaign objectives, who is most appropriate to that, have you done your due diligence to make sure that they are an appropriate influencer, what is the reputation like, how long have they been around, have they, how can you benchmark their activity so far and the campaigns they've been involved with. There's a whole host of questions that go with who you pick, and obviously how that conversation starts and what the value exchange you want can be. Of course, it's got to work for all parties, and I think what has come through very loud and clear here is that actually having a legal perspective on this is absolutely crucial. And like I say before, I think that's probably one area that practitioners wouldn't have thought about. It would have seen it, as Nicola's question said before, we would have thought it was very simple and similar to a conversation with a journalist. And it's just not at the moment. And Nicola's question was really great because actually it shines a light on where is our industry going and what does this mean for us. Will the ASA loosen up? Will there be different guidelines in the future, or will it impact how we work with media? These are all things that are still to be answered, but it's really important that we keep abreast of it and try our very best and actually can show the process that we take when we are working with an influencer. I think that's the best I can say, I'm afraid, because like I say, it's horses for courses. There isn't, you can't get an off-the-shelf campaign to use within an influencer. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, so it's about doing solid, best practice PR work as you should be doing anyway with any group.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be, so you can use different platforms. They might be on different platforms and different channels, and there's no problem with that. It's just making sure that actually, the process is in place and is followed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think we've reached time. I'm getting several notifications. We have to bring this to an end. We have a number of questions that weren't answered. We'll do our best to get those answered for our listeners and get them on the blog, and that will be sent out with the recording as well. I'd like to thank our three guests today, Stephen, Sarah, and Andrew. Thank you so much for your expertise and insight this morning.
Yes, thank you for having us.
And I'd just like to thank our audience for joining us. It's been really excellent, and yeah, all these guys are on social media. Do check out the FutureProof guidance, which is website. The community is fantastic. But please do get in touch with everyone, and particularly Scott Guthrie, who is another co-author on this. He's a fantastic font of knowledge. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.